This is a desert, and I need to cross it as fast as I can using a Lego vehicle. Yep, that's not gonna work, so instead I built several other unique vehicles to cross the desert, starting with a monster truck. I'll use these massive tractor tires and make a simple chassis that won't have anything but a drive motor. And on top of the frame, I'll add the G-Wagon, since if it can't make it across itself, it can drive vicariously through the monster truck. Okay, now let's see how fast it can cross. Wow, that actually drives really well on the sand. Which means I'm now going to build and test some other normal and lots of weirder vehicle designs to see if they do any better. Another vehicle I can make is a Dune buggy. To make the basic chassis, I got some Technic bricks and started with a rear differential which will let the wheels spin individually. Then above the assembly, I added this Lego Power Functions motor using a gear chain to the back which will power the wheels. But it also needs to be able to steer, so I'll make a system on each side for the front wheels to be held into, which will act as a joint and allow them to pivot towards the left or right. Then I'll add a platform and this gear rack which will connect this through a pinhole here. Then we can use this Lego servo motor to drive the steering system. I tried a couple gears, but this medium-sized blue one fits perfectly. Okay, let's see how it drives. Yeah, it's definitely too powerful of a gear ratio with this one speed controller, so I changed it to have a bit smaller of a gear ratio. And now we can see how it performs in the sand. Yeah, okay, that failed instantly, and it's because of the differential and the drive setup, which causes the more stuck wheel to stop moving while the other one just spins in place and digs out the sand. But it should be easy enough to fix to switch out the differential for a straight axle connected to both wheels. But it's also looking a bit ugly, so I used some panels and angled Technic plates to build out a black and red frame around the mechanics of the buggy. Sure, that'll do. Now let's test it and see how fast it can cross the desert. Okay, next I want to see if I can turn this 10-wheeled Lego Star Wars tank into a working sandcrawler. This video is also sponsored by Republic Bricks, who sent me this tank and a bunch of crazily detailed custom Star Wars minifigures. To motorize this tank should be fairly simple. The frame is already set up in a way that should allow me to motorize it, but the two ends of the wheels are fairly inaccessible because of the pieces around the axles. So on one end I removed what I needed to, but having 4 of the 5 axles should be plenty. Republic Bricks not only makes this kit that you can buy, but they also sell hundreds of other custom Star Wars models, like tanks of course, but also tons of different ships and much more. This tank is really well designed, hence why I'm able to manhandle it so much without worrying that it will break into a million pieces. My first idea to motorize the tank was to use just one motor and add chain links between each axle, and since unlike gears, chains rotate in the same direction, it should work just fine to power all the axles to go in the same direction. It took a bit to get the right amount of chain links on, but once they were all added, the results were promising. Republic Bricks also sells custom minifigures, like the ones I previously mentioned. I pretty much don't know any of these dudes' names, but I sure can appreciate the level of detail and quality required to make such a minifigure this cool. In order to motorize the wheels though, I had a few issues. The circuit cube motors don't actually fully fit one stud's worth of axle, which meant a little extra was sticking out in the way of the main wheel axle. But by adding an extra gear on the side, it allows room for everything involved. Then I can just pop the battery box in this perfect little compartment here and test it out. Wow, that works a lot better than I expected. It is gonna have to run on sand though, so I'm not really sure how promising this really is. Another great thing about Republic Bricks is the range of products for sale. You can get yourself a $2,000 custom Lego set or find many $25 items, perfect for gifting your family and friends. The instructions are also very clear, which is helpful when building a set this large. And speaking of the tank, I tested it out on carpet, but it required enough torque that the motor popped out of its casing. So I switched it out just in case it was a bit weaker than the others, then locked it in with plates, which seemed to do a bit better. Then I tested it on sand, which did not work at all. I went through multiple problems trying to fix it, but nothing seemed to work. But what I can say is that even though this can't drive across sand, it will still look great on your shelf, just like the rest of Republic Bricks custom sets and figures. They also have some non-Star Wars minifigures like McDonald's, Trump, and Ronaldo, so I've linked the website down below in the description and pinned comment. And when you're ready to check out, you can use code RJM10 for 10% off your entire purchase. Okay, but what if I can't use tires or treads? Well, I was messing around with random pieces, and I found that when I spin this corkscrew piece in the sand, it sort of moves forward, so I'm gonna attempt to make a motorized version. First, I built a frame holding 4 rows of the screw pieces, but that was gonna be a lot to motorize, so I narrowed it down to just 2. In order to actually power this, I can't have a gear or motor directly connected to the screws, since anything lower than them will impede the flow of the sand. So instead, I use universal joints in a bracket to route the axles up higher where they could actually add the necessary parts to make it move. But the rest of the problems, like choosing where to mount the motors and making the frame sturdy enough, were all pretty simple to solve. Okay, let's give it a test on the table to see if it can move at all. Oh my goodness, I was certainly not expecting it to move that well. This is probably one of the most satisfying builds I've ever made. But unfortunately, it was about as unsatisfying as it gets when I place it in the sand. There's not a sliver of hope that will move no matter what I do. And speaking of this failure, I also had another failure. I tried making a single tread vehicle and it worked for like 2 seconds before failing. I think it's because of the sand getting in the joints of the tread pieces. I was also going to try and build a normal 2-treaded tank vehicle, but I think it will have the same problem. Plus, it's boring, and I want to build more creative ways to cross the desert anyways. Next, I want to try and make a 4-legged walker mechanism, and I found a design online that I'll replicate. First, I'll take this large LEGO Power Functions motor and make a setup that uses a worm gear, for once not actually using the housings that I usually do. Then I spent an hour fiddling around with a bunch of different beams of different lengths to eventually end up with this 4-legged walking robot which works on the table. But unfortunately, it can't make it very far in the sand. So naturally, my next step is to double the amount of legs, quadruple the size, and make a working LEGO crab walker to conquer the sand, because I've had a bunch of failures in this video, and I'm not gonna let this one get the best of me. This is gonna be really difficult, but I also think if I can pull it off, it will be really cool and rewarding. So I got to work trying to make the linkages for the legs. At first, I connected them all to the center and then made another Technic axle with room for a spinning piece that would actuate the leg movement. I was gonna use these large gears, but I realized that the Technic beams I was using to connect aren't actually long enough for the gear to make a full rotation without hitting the top beam. Thankfully though, I found another piece that has the same spacing for the holes, but will fit. Not that that nearly solved all my problems though, because I quickly realized I forgot the most important detail. In order for the linkage to make a full rotation, there can't be an axle in the way of its movement like there is here. So I decided to start from scratch with what I learned and build a solid frame to hold everything where it needs to be. I'll use a center gear that drives a smaller gear on each side. That way I can connect to the linkage but not have any beams or axles impeding the full rotation. Then I'll build up multiple sets of these and a frame on top to hold the legs in place. But this time I had a different problem. Although the linkages work smoothly when I held the whole thing in the air, if I set it on the ground it would immediately seize up and fail. I tried just adding more power in the form of worm gears for torque, but that wasn't the problem. In order to make a crab walking mechanism, you need a very specific motion profile which isn't just a round motion. In this animation I found, it shows that each leg needs to stay the same height while on the ground. Otherwise, all the legs essentially work against each other and pinch inwards at the ground. So I scrapped the second design and started what would hopefully be the last attempt at the build. First, I need to build the linkages the right way, which isn't super easy and had one issue that I just could not solve. On the diagram, this little beam here always stays upright, which isn't what gravity wants to do. So on mine, it would always fall down and mess with the leg's motion. But eventually, I added a flip-flop beam at the bottom and these 2 pins on each side which won't allow it to go past a certain angle. I made each gear responsible for spinning 2 legs, that way I could just get one set working and duplicate it to have all 8 legs working. Okay, I got them connected up using some axle connectors which allow everything to be run off one axle. And thankfully when I hand turned the machine, it actually started walking, meaning I got the profiles right. Then I started motorizing it, and of course after everything I'd gone through to get to this point, it still wasn't cooperating. Every time I set it on the ground to see if it could walk on its own, it still wasn't quite strong enough. I even almost decided to count holding up the battery box in the air as a success, but I had one final idea to see if it worked. So for my final attempt to make it work, I switched out these 3 long beams for these L-shaped 4 long beams, which for some reason did the trick perfectly, and now it actually walks on flat ground. Now let's see if it can actually traverse the sandy desert. No way, that is actually so cool looking. This is probably one of the coolest vehicles I've ever built. Well, what did we learn? I guess it's pretty hard to beat good old big wheels if you want to go fast, but there's a lot of cooler ways to get the job done, or at least to try and get it done. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to use the link in the description or pinned comment for 10% off Republic Bricks.